Okay, looks like we're good to go. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm excited to have a nice conversation between preservation professionals and students and new professionals, anyone who's interested in working with preservation and wants to know a little bit more about it. So it's a pretty casual chat. I do have a screen share here. It's not a presentation. It's just to kind of have some prompts, keep everything going, so everyone knows that they can ask questions or have some ideas of questions to ask. So for that, a little preliminaries here. So when you do talk, it would be helpful to know how you pronounce your name. So if you could say your name, what organization you're at or your school. If you're just here on your own as a for your personal reasons, that's great too. You're absolutely welcome. Any position you might have, whether that's student or the position you have in an organization, and any other details you'd like to share about yourself. It is a nice casual chat, and we just want to really encourage some good conversation. And then I also want to point out that if you open up the participants box, that would be good. And then you should be able to say yes or no or thumbs up or raise your hand and this and that. And that will help us make sure that we see you so that you can chime in whenever you'd like to. So please go ahead and use those. And I'm Becky Galler. I currently work for NEDCC and I'm a member of the SAA preservation section. So that's why I'm here. And then helping us today, we have Sawyer. He's on our education committee that's part of the preservation section. And we are going to be leading some discussion and moderating chat. Go ahead and open your chat box as well so that we can all have a good conversation going here. Oh, always looking for the windows here. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pop up some conversation starters here. And I really encourage any of you to just go ahead and type in the chat box if you have a question that you'd like to start with or answer a question or participate in the conversation, or you can just go ahead and unmute yourself. If you're finding that you're not able to unmute yourself, let us know in the chat so we can do that for you. Because like I said a couple minutes ago, in case you weren't here yet, we're all getting used to the SAA Zoom account settings. So with that, I keep losing my chat box, so I don't know if it's there. But if we can just, yeah, anyone feel free to just dive right in.
Hi, I'll dive in. My name is Danita. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I'm a student at Simmons College, which is now called Simmons University. I'm in my second semester at SLIS, and I'm on the Archives Management concentration track. And I'm just now taking my first Intro to Archives class, so I'm definitely a newbie. But I did have a question for one of the professionals. What is, would you say, one of the most challenging thing that you encountered when you first started your career?
I'll certainly give anyone a minute to just chime in. So I don't want to be the talk over anyone, but I can go ahead and get that started. And I would say the first challenge is just kind of finding a good place to start out. Um, and I was lucky in that I was at the time living in Colorado and had been in Colorado for a long time, and I really was expanding my job search nationwide and just kind of gathering all the positions that were available and sifting through them and then applying. I guess that's kind of general for any sort of new professional, but that was one of the first things that I needed to tackle. And I knew I was interested in preservation specifically, so I was able to really focus on organizations like the Northeast Document Conservation Center, where I currently work, and really could apply. But I'd love for others to chime in as well.
I mean, I would also add, so I'm Diani Faiga. I'm also on the SAA preservation section team, but I'm working as the director of preservation at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts in Philadelphia. And one other thing I would say, my gut reaction was to say, well, finding a position, because there's a relative scarcity of positions that are completely devoted to preservation in our field. But I mean, that was like my gut reaction for about 10 seconds, but then I realized that's not really that's not the be all end all answer, because that's kind of a negative way of thinking about it. And so I think maybe a broader way to look at that concern is finding a position in which you can use and kind of have institutional backup and capacity to use your preservation skills and interest, and to have that identified as part of your responsibility. So even if it's a job that doesn't necessarily have preservation in the job title, you know, working and advocating to have it written into the job description and the job responsibilities, so that you are kind of charged with the task of really doing what you love, if that thing is preservation.
I'm I'm Jim Havern. First off, it's tricky because my career has spanned a number of years and a number of focuses, and there's been a constant stream of preservation and recovery all the way through that. But for me, the biggest problem that I've come across off and on over the years is the tendency to people to, and this is actually kind of similar to what was just said, the tendency for people to want to pigeonhole preservation, whether it be saying, well, I don't have to worry about this, someone else is worrying about it, or someone else saying, this isn't something you have to worry about, this is our area. To people thinking, well, you know, we've always been in control of this kind of environment, and now the environment's changed, and them failing to realize who all they need to bring into the picture. I've been doing an awful lot of data recovery for people who have digital records that were in the care of records managers, archivists, et cetera, who follow the standards that have been laid out for them, many times by vendors. But I do cybersecurity, which changes drastically every 6 to 18 months. So the stuff that those people had learned was obsolete. So there are, I mean, we're only talking about minor things like court records, vital statistics, hospital records, land records, you know, everyday stuff that people are used to finding in archives, but have been stored in an environment that people, both sides of the equation that were supposed to be working on it stopped somewhere before the middle, and it's only because they never stopped to realize that the pigeonhole they put themselves in, or they were put in, didn't extend far enough. So a lot of what I've ended up doing hasn't been going in helping people do that. It's been helping connect them with the people who can do that for them. But I think that's on any level. I'm sorry, is it Diani? Did I get that ballpark correctly?
Danita.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, Danita was pointing out, you know, people not even realizing that preservation was part of her job and having to do that. And when you have somebody who's with IT, or is with records management, or administration, that really doesn't have a clue what your job really should be, that's a struggle sometimes. So you have to get creative on that.
Awesome, thank you. And just for anyone who has recently come into the room, so Danita asked the first question, which is one of the main challenges that we all noticed when we start working in preservation or in archives. And Gianni is also here. She's the head of preservation services at CCAHA. So there's both names here. And also, if anyone else wants to chime in with some challenges that you had when you started your job, that would be great. And also just to reorient everyone as well, we have the chat box available. We have Sawyer managing that. So Sawyer, you can also just unmute and chime in with anything that you're seeing in the chat box. And I'm seeing that Mark has raised your hand. So yeah, go ahead, Mark.
All right, I'm hoping this is working.
I can hear you.
Okay, good. So my name is Mark Colburn, and I'm the preservation librarian at the University of Maryland in College Park. And so to get back to Danita's question, one of the biggest challenges for me working in an academic institution was figuring out where our department fit in with the rest of the library. And then where, for me, also trying to figure out where the money came from to fund us, and how we obtained additional funding to take care of certain services. Within our we maintain 7 libraries, or we're responsible for helping maintain 7 libraries on campus, and trying to figure out where that pot of money comes from, and if there's ways to get more pots of money to fund other preservation projects within the campus. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And certainly welcome anyone to chime in, or we can maybe move on to the next question that someone might have. Either way, go. Oh, I see Emily. Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, so this is kind of related, although a little bit of a different track maybe. So my name is Emily Homoka. I am the archivist and loan arranger at the Shawnee Tribe Cultural Center in Miami, Oklahoma. I am also a new professional. This is my first year as a professional archivist. So I know Mark was just talking about preservation kind of in the context of a large organization, but does anyone have any experience approaching preservation in a very small institution that maybe doesn't already have a preservation program? How would you advocate that to the people? Kind of thoughts on first steps or ways to approach that. Yeah, thanks so much.
And again, feel free to just chime in. I can't start at this time because my entire job is around preservation. So please go ahead if anyone can help out Emily with that question.
Yeah, I have some thoughts, but I would actually rather hear from folks in similar situations about like success stories, or maybe what's worked and what hasn't.
I think I can chime in just a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So my name is Kelly Smith. I am a loan arranger as well. I work for a small private collection. It's a combination of personal records and corporate materials. So I started, and there's basically no real archive program. So preservation was something that from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to make sure was incorporated. So I kind of just prioritized what the collection needed, which was pretty much just very basic, housing requirements, and climate control, and just kind of the initial small steps that can make a big difference over time. And I guess I really just tried to show management how important that was, and how I guess, the small steps you can take to incorporate it that maybe aren't super high cost, but will have a big impact. So just using proper storage materials, and following kind of consistent measures, and also just keeping an eye on things. We had a few sort of sets of really old records that had been sitting in a shelf in a closet. So just taking those out and, first of all, just marking, we didn't even know we had these things. There was, for instance, a giant scrapbook from the 1930s that had original photos and handwriting. So I guess just knowing what we had and identifying priorities is what I could recommend. And I know it's kind of hard when you're the only person doing it, but I think it kind of supports the value of the collection. And I just tried to argue for doing the small things, and yeah, starting from there.
I think that's great advice, and it was making me think of some of the clients that I work with as a consultant about preservation to small and mid-sized organizations, and how happens a lot where there's small departments, or there's just not the preservation's not necessarily in the job title, like we talked about earlier, or there's no budget for preservation and this and that. And one of the ways that we frame it when we're doing a consultation is to really think about the mission of the organization, and try as you can to make preservation part of that mission, or at least tie any sort of preservation needs to that mission, which is very similar to what Kelly was talking about as well, just kind of identifying where, or explaining why it's so important to, if your mandate is to take care of collections or to have collections that are available for access, to really make it clear how preservation supports that. And you can really use your tool and your collection development policies and all of that as, use your mission statement and your collection development policies as really good tools in your toolbox. So that can be a way to get that in there as well. And I see Erica has raised a hand, so go ahead.
Thank you. I have like one is a question and one is piggybacking off of what Kelly said. I took a last semester, I'm a student, by the way. I'm a current graduate MLIS student at the University of Maryland. And my professor, that's the first time I ever heard of Loner Ranger. And she definitely told us, like, working in small institutions like that is a good way to get experience, because oftentimes, like everybody knows, you're often the only person that's doing it. It can be a lot of work and tedious, but it's really great experience. And kind of on the whole point of experience, what skills outside of the field would you say is also a good skill to have, or prior experience that might not even be related to the field could be useful? Because I know we tend to look at the profession as you have to have this experience, that experience, but as a student who has some prior internship experience that had archiving involved, but it was like either I was dealing with metadata or figuring out how to digitally capture slide film and working with the tools that I had, which were kind of limited, but still pulling off the project anyway. Like, what other skills would you say, like soft skills, or could help you in the field as well?
I'm happy to chime in here. My name is Eve Niger. I'm the lead archivist at Boston Public Library. And I was previously working as a processing archivist at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, where preservation was not part of my job, but I incorporated into everything I did. I'm going to answer your question, not just for preservation, but I think for the field in general, that I think this is pretty cliche, but just any type of communication skills, both written, verbal, are really essential because, I think something we come upon in our job a lot is explaining what we do to other people who have no context for the work. And I think that's true for the preservation component too, is, someone else in your department, in your library that you may be working at may understand, what it looks like to take books out of a library, but may have, the preservation or the factors when we think about preservation just may be completely outside the scope of that person's experience. And being able to gently teach and communicate in a way that brings people in with you as partners in preservation, as opposed to like you being the person who's just telling them what to do, is really important. So I think, those soft skills, communication skills are really important. And teaching experience, as Heather is mentioning in the chat. And I had one more thing. Oh, so you said what kind of skills from other careers or other experience? Customer service, like frontline, food services, retail, customer service experience is really important, because those are those soft communication skills, I think. And dealing with people who are frustrated and don't understand and want something but can't get it, and have to work within a structure or a workflow that doesn't necessarily help them or fit into what they're used to doing. I think, and getting them on board is really important.
And I want to follow up with Eve. Thank you. And I totally agree with that as well. When I started working in libraries in general, in 2008, I think I was told that I got my first job in a library because I had experience at Starbucks. I worked at Starbucks for a long time, and I had that like really direct, like intense customer service background, and a lot of my jobs before that did as well. So I definitely agree with that. And just being able to interface with people as well. And I guess I'll just continue with that thought as well. In library school, we always had to do, of course, group projects. Everyone has to do that, but also group presentations and doing a lot of like standing up in front of the class and speaking. And I was like, am I really gonna, I'm like, I've been in libraries for a while. Am I really gonna be doing this? And it's actually because I do preservation outreach and teach about preservation all the time in my job, that came in really handy. I actually really did end up needing that skill. So even though I didn't think it was going to directly apply to being a librarian, it ended up being essential to the job I have now. Any others? Or maybe Sawyer, you can pop in and kind of sum up what's happening in the chat box as well.
I have one other thought about a
Go ahead.
skill, and this is like a super soft skill, not related directly to experience, but I think just in terms of, something to maybe emphasize in an interview or something is adaptability and flexibility, because I think it's really important to recognize that, I don't know, preservation is an interesting field, and that there are the best practices and the parameters that we learn in school, and it's super important to learn that information. But in the real world, it's also really important to be able to take the standards that we learned in school and kind of map them onto our given situation. So needing to balance recommendations with feasibility is, I think, critically important. So, if you're interviewing for a preservation job and you want to show that you can really be able to like think creatively about what will work for your institution and what will be the best given your institution's range of resources, that's, I think, a big one.
Yeah, and just to summarize from the chat box for those who can't see, or there's a mention in terms of having an MLIS degree can be helpful, just because being able to understand how a library or a collection works can help determine how to treat different items. And if you're doing more work with items, having a chemistry background can help. There's a mention of just in general being able to think in systems in terms of understanding how different things work together. Also collaboration being very important. Being able to also with outreach and community building can also be very helpful. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And also, Mark, I see you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so along the lines of collaboration, I would also, I think that is incredibly important. And I would also say that you might want to think about some unorthodox collaborations with departments, because one of the best collaborations we've had on campus has been to work with the housekeeping staff and with the folks who run the HVAC systems. Because honestly, the housekeepers are in the stacks all day long, every day. They know those stacks better than we do a lot of times. And so being able to talk to them about what's going on, especially when you get into like integrated pest management, and when you start thinking about what's going on in terms of possible mold appearing, they see it a lot more and a lot more frequently than we do. So being able to build collaborations with housekeeping, we have our own dedicated team at HVAC at Maryland that deal with nothing. They do nothing but HVAC work throughout the buildings. And so we've built a real good partnership with our HVAC folks over the years, so that we can speak to them. We can go directly to them now and have conversations with them about what's going on in the buildings. And this has borne a lot of fruit over the years. So I can't emphasize those two things enough.
That is such a good point, Mark. And it also makes me think as in terms of digital preservation, it's really helpful to know as much about digital preservation from school as you can. That's a really good skill to work on and build. And when you do digital preservation at your organizations, it's really helpful to have a good collaboration or relationship with your IT, whether that's a department or a contractor, but just having a really good working relationship, maybe a common set of terms that you can use, and and that's just a really mutually beneficial relationship as well. So that's such a good point.
And I would add on to that
Go ahead.
having a good relationship and um, honing your communication skills directly towards IT is a good skill, not even just for digital preservation, but like across the board for anything, anytime you're working in archives or libraries. And it's interesting. I graduated from University of Michigan School of Information, and we all had to take programming classes. And there were a lot of very traditional MLIS students who really resisted that. And the way they marketed that to us, or told us how important it is that you may not be doing the programming, but you need to figure out where that mutual language is, as you said, Becky. Like, what's your shared terminology? You need to be able to communicate your needs to developers, to IT, and they need to communicate back with you, and you need to be able to like have a productive conversation.
Okay, any other thoughts about skills and experiences that are helpful to start a job in archives and preservation? Or we can go ahead and keep the discussion going to another topic if you'd like as well. Give you a second. Okay, I don't see anyone unmuting, so please go ahead and feel free to ask the next question. And I also want to encourage those of us who are currently preservation professionals, if you have questions for students, that's also welcome. I do have some ideas as well on the next slide. Let's see if I can. Not that students have to, or new professionals have to stop asking questions. It's just an open forum, but some other ideas as well. So I'll stay quiet for a second so someone has a chance to ask a question. No need to be shy. We're all friendly here.
Hello, I am Lourdes Johnson. I graduated a year ago, and I'm doing 2 part-time internships, and one of them had to do with um, well, I guess the prompt question that I'm gonna address is what digital preservation training is available to you as a student or new professional. I think I found very helpful the digital curation class, and then digital assets management, because it gave me a very high level view, and it gave me really it really made me realize, wow, all records management, library information science, um, archives, everything is converging, and all what it entails. It means that I will be working with a lot of people, and I had to kind of be versed, and I think have that shared semantics. So I thought it was interesting, and so yeah, digital asset management, digital curation, and uh, basics of archiving were one of the most valuable.
Thanks so much for that, because even though I didn't go to library school that long ago, let's see, when did I graduate? 2016. And there were some digital preservation classes that were usually related to other topics. It wasn't a whole lot because things are changing so quickly. So I am really curious to hear what people are learning, and also if you're learning about like disaster planning and sustainability. And we actually talked a lot about that for our section meeting last summer during the SAA conference. And so we're always really curious. So yeah, if any of our other students or new professionals have experiences from your school programs about any of that, I'd love to hear about it. Or we can go ahead and ask another question. That's fine too.
What specifically are you asking at the moment?
I was just curious about any other students and new professionals in the room here who what kinds of coursework they had that was about digital preservation, or maybe even sustainability within that topic. So those were things that weren't talked a whole lot about when I was in school. Or you can go ahead and introduce a new question. That's fine too.
Oh, I was going to comment on your question. For me, it's been a lot about how to preserve information, how to preserve objects. I haven't had, I mean, those courses normally, I'm in the latter half. I'm due to graduate this December. So normally they would have been in person just so I could get that hands-on experience. But of course, everything is virtual right now. So I've been learning a lot about how to preserve objects so people can still have access to them, how to take care of them, how to just preserve their longevity as long as you possibly can. I also took a few courses where we center on digital archives or digital preservation, where we talked about what was it, databases, unique identifiers. I'm trying to remember some of the stuff I learned. It's quite a bit, but yeah, we've been learning a lot of things. Now we're learning how to properly take care of the objects, at least for me anyway.
That's great. Thank you for contributing to that as well. And is there, I guess I'm not quite sure. Do we want to go ahead and someone ask another question, whether you're a student or a professional?
I'll ask a question, Becky. Erica brought up something that I'm really interested in since I graduated eons ago, is How are the students learning preservation in the time of COVID with remote, and you're presumably limited with your hands-on experience? I would love to hear how that's going for people.
Excellent question. So I graduated a year ago, and I did my program online with San Jose State University because I am a mom, and there's no way I can do a traditional in presence master's degree. So anyway, our teacher, she used, for example, she taught us, we did some projects with Archive It to learn the workflow for web archiving. And then we use Droid and VCurator. So I think we learned in modules, and we were exposed to some technologies that archivists and people who are in the field are using to preserve objects. It was a little challenging because you needed to digest first. Basically, you need to learn that a little bit of the technology and how it all fits and what is the workflow. And then we had to, but it was more focused about, okay, what are the lessons learned? Because of course, there's so much, it's impossible to learn everything. It's so diverse, but I think it was a good, to me, I found it was a good starting point to be versed, at least so I can listen to conversations and know what the professionals are talking about. And it work in an online environment. So I heard from other peers that they took VCurator online, they try an online class, but there were some hiccups, and they're redesigning modules to make it more relevant.
Thank you. It's also really nice to hear that that there is a component for online learning where you're actually practicing using these tools and learning the software or the programs directly. That's really interesting. Anyone else have anything they want to chime in with that?
This may drift farther out than what a lot of people are thinking about these days. Like I say, I do the cybersecurity aspect as well. And keeping in mind that security means keeping what needs to be confidential, what needs to be accessible, and verifying the integrity of the items. And I've worked with teams that go in and they do security audits. They're authorized to try to break into establishments. Usually, we find things that your average IT person does not find. But I've been able to take online. Well, usually they're competitions, but I'm always amazed at how many of them start with getting into a building, and the first thing you do is disable the alarm system, and that includes the fire system and everything else, which can be done online. And at my request once, we also hacked the environmental systems and turned on the sprinkler system and turned the heat to maximum on a Friday night. This was a virtual system in this case, but it had come from a real building. And so when it gave it a weekend of water pouring over the business's library, the temperatures in the upper 90s, which you can imagine wasn't good. So when we do places where we're going into records management or they have a library or something like that, that's one of the things we check. We continue to do this virtually. So I was brought aboard a team when I was new at this to learn it, and we brought others on to learn it. So using virtual environments can be, very, very helpful at times, because it helps you think about things outside of what you're used to seeing around you. Most people have, and when I mention that, they sort of shrug it off, like, what difference would that make? We had a flood in Nashville a few years back, and there were several major record storage centers, including those used by archives, that were underwater, literally underwater, not just flooded. And the people had never thought that could happen. But when you go through virtual things, sometimes you can do tabletop exercises and drills in a different way and think about it in a different way. And it actually can strengthen your skill set rather than weaken it.
It's really great to hear about these opportunities that are still available when we can't meet in person. And I hadn't thought of it immediately, but my graduate program was mostly virtual. And like in evening classes and on the weekends, but we were supposed to meet up for a weekend intensive face-to-face class for our core library school classes a few times a semester. And I don't know how they've been handling it during the pandemic, but I can imagine that could be pretty difficult. But it is nice to hear that there's some good opportunities. If there's any other creative ways that your schools have worked around the pandemic, please go ahead and let us know as well.
Hi, this is Danita in Boston again. I'm at Simmons, and I'm in the Intro to Archival Methods and Practices course, which includes a 60-hour required internship. A lot of places, the on-site places, are not currently open, I guess. We find out in a week or two whether we get assigned somewhere or not. But to handle that, they have a practicum, which is online, and it's as if you were working maybe in a repository or somewhere. And it's a practicum that you work at your own hours. So you could be working at 3 a.m. if you wanted to. And that's how they're handling that. Just to, in full disclosure, they had that opportunity already offered pre-pandemic, but now a lot of people are using that because of the COVID situation.
Thank you. And I think with that, we can go ahead and maybe move on to the next question. Unless anyone else has something to say, please feel free to chime in anytime. And I will open it up to all of you to go ahead and pose a new question to the group as well. Or maybe if we have a second, we can have Sawyer catch us up on the chat box as well.
Nothing really much new in terms of questions or anything on our end.
No problem. I didn't want to cut you off. And I am seeing that Mara, go ahead.
Hi. Yes, I'm Mara Gregory. I am, like Denisa, I am a student at Simmons in Boston, although currently I am, usually I live in Boston, but right now I'm in Tucson, Arizona, so I am doing everything virtually. So I am fairly new to archives. I am also in the archives management concentration at Simmons, but I'm just taking my first archives class, and so I'm kind of in that exploration phase. And so I'm curious, for the preservation professionals, what do you love about your job?
That's an easy one for me to start. I thought I heard someone unmuting, so certainly feel free to chime in as well. One of my favorite things is, because I get to do teaching and outreach about preservation, is helping individuals and organizations find ways to do preservation. And I especially like to help them figure out like low budget or no budget ways in order to achieve a a good environment. And it's not this is again adapting these best practices to what's actually sustainable and practical in their organizations or at home. But that is, I think, one of my favorite things in like coming up with these good solutions for people. And I know someone was about to speak, so please go ahead.
So I'll chime in for a second. For me personally, it is being able to feel like I make a difference on campus. We get to have direct hands-on work with, in sometimes very important collections, and even dealing with the day-to-day collections, the general collections materials. You feel like you actually make a difference on campus. And for the other part for me is the depth and breadth of the collection that we have, and being able to try to think of really interesting and innovative solutions to work on everything from, your typical textbook all the way to things like some valuable ink on paper materials that we have, to a monkey fur cape that we have that's part of one of our collections, to music scores that get used completely different from everything else that we have on campus. So it can be a lot of fun. It can be very interesting, and you'll get exposed to a lot of different objects and different types of objects through working in preservation.
That's awesome. I definitely want to know more about this monkey fur cape as well. I'm sure everyone does. And I'm also curious to hear what other people love about their jobs as well.
I mean, I secretly think that preservation is the most important part of collections. Like, there would not be collections unless we were thinking about their preservation and how to take care of them. And so I love my job because I find it super gratifying. Like, I like thinking about even kind of the social justice aspect of it, to take it on kind of a tangent, that by determining what we preserve, we are kind of determining what folks will be able to learn from in the future. So we have some really important decisions to make in terms of making preservation accessible, and spreading the word, and being educators, and kind of fostering that knowledge out in the field. So that's my really soapboxy, highfalutin response to why I love my job. But it's true. It's absolutely true. It's because I think it's so important.
Deani, I'm going to agree with you that I think preservation is the most important thing. And I think what makes it the most important thing is I think we can make the argument that everything else we do as library professionals, or as archival professionals, is part of preservation, is like a form of preservation. And I have a background as a visual materials archivist and cataloger, and I was taught that cataloging is a form of preservation, like cataloging visual materials for preservation. So I think the most gratifying thing for me is all these tiny tasks and efforts that we do to make material more accessible. And that moment of like seeing something become more accessible is the moment of excitement for me. And that's a lot of what my job is right now, is bringing Boston Public Library's archival collections that for a long time have been not very accessible to a place of better accessibility and discoverability. So that's the most exciting thing for me. I'm sure a lot of people also feel that way.
I work consulting or contracting work at times. And because I work across different fields, I get the opportunity to work with people with different backgrounds with the same ultimate aim, and help unite them at times, sometimes not. But I also do a lot of work with very small organizations, nonprofits, many people that they're just thinking about trying to preserve their history. So we're talking about setting up a management program or setting up an archives, setting up what do we need to do. And it's really nice to be able to work with the people who have a passion for the goal, but haven't ever had the training. And by the same token, also work with disaster recovery a bit, which is a mix. There are times when I'm not ready to go back out on one. And recently I haven't actually gone out. My teams have gone out in the field without me. I've worked logistics on them. I haven't been physically able to go. But when you go to the coast of Mississippi and you're driving along and the map says, well, you're in the middle of a town and you hadn't seen a building for a while, it's a little devastating. When you come back out of there with family Bibles, a court registry, computers, things like that, you feel like you've gotten a small victory. And that can be for the people of the town, that can be for individual families, whatever. So you sometimes get involved with stuff that you wish you had never seen, but like I say, you get victories with this. And I think when you do preservation, you sometimes feel like the benefits of it are a little more concrete, correctly in front of you. You've seen something that wasn't being preserved or might not have been preserved. Now it's being preserved. You can see that better than you can see when you know you're saving something that's going to, 20 years down the road, the right person's going to come along and be really glad that that document's available and they're going to do the research. This is now.
That's very cool. And I'm trying not to put anyone on the spot, but Heather, I'm really curious about what the Bugmobile is that was mentioned in the chat.
Oh, I use a I don't know what you would call it really. It's a cart that I wrote Bugmobile on, and it's got pictures of bugs all over it. And that's what I use when I'm going around to switch out the bug traps and see what kind of critters that we have. So you get the few of them always want to come see what the newest cool thing is that you found, and most of them go the opposite way. But I just take satisfaction in walking the halls and seeing people run in terror.
I love it. That's great. Hopefully we'll get to see a picture of it or something if you have one. I just clicked something. I think everything's okay though. Anyway, any other people have some favorite parts of their job they'd like to share? This is really fun to hear about everybody's joy that they have at work. Anyone? Well, we have a few minutes left, and I think there's plenty of time for another question as well. So please feel free to pipe up and ask a question or answer a question or just comment. That's fine as well. It's been really fun to talk with everyone this past hour, but we do have time for a little bit more. So please go ahead and speak up.
This is Danita again. I have a question for James. James, you said sometimes you work as a contractor and you go to different locations. And you mentioned before that some people have been obsoleted, if that's a verb, out of their jobs. Do you ever meet with resistance when you come to show new ways of handling the materials?
Well, I'm not sure what I said that came across as saying that they were obsoleted out of the jobs. I know there are people who fear that. When I go in to do, say, a security, when we're doing audits, our purpose there is not to take away somebody's job, but to show that there's an area of weakness that they need to work on. And sometimes that requires bringing in additional people. But I'm also an archivist. I mean, I don't just play with my computers. I look for the chance to get to those physical documents too. My grandfather started me out at the age of 3. We have the picture of him taking me through the cemeteries and pointing out who people were, and also showing us old books and papers and letters. Yeah, I do get resistance when I come in from people. It just depends on the circumstances. I find there's a lot of resistance in larger structures, universities, government, places like that, where everybody's got their general department, and they tend to feel that they've got a handle on everything and don't like the idea that there might be somebody from outside that might have it. I'm not anything other than a different set of skills. When I go in and work with someone who's got 25 years of systems admin work, I'm going to listen to them when they're talking about systems administration. But I also know they haven't had much work working with recent influx of ransomware. And outside of if they've been working in the same place for 15 years, they haven't been exposed to the other stuff. So it becomes a diplomatic thing. And then persuading people that what you do fits. It's easier when you already got a conflict going on, like the people in IT are absolutely certain that some program that the university subscribes to is perfect for doing preservation or access for an archives, and the archives knows better, but they don't really know how to persuade IT. So then you come in and you're the person that helps them fit together. What's really sad is when you've done something and to help people, and they choose not to select it and then get done in by whatever you were trying to preserve. It's not that you're always right. It's just that on those occasions, it makes it clear that you might have been right. If they got hit with a storm 5 years later, and if they had taken the steps you suggested, then maybe they'd have been okay. You don't notice that so much. But if you talk, I've been talking for years about we need to think about older forms of communication. I was learning my Morse code again, a brand new, quote unquote, brand new way of people slipping malware onto people's computers is to send it in Morse code that then gets interpreted, because the software, the defenses are not stopping Morse code. They don't see anything about dot dash, dot dash, dot dash. But then when that's put together and it clicks on, opens up a URL that immediately downloads ransomware onto your computer, so I see what everything I do is augmenting and filling in a niche that just was, between the older way of doing things and some of the newer ways of doing things, but not replacing. And I always try to stress that. In fact, a lot of the people that I go along on, I recruit them into I don't have a large staff. I have my people that I contact and say, there's a project over here that's over my head. I need somebody with more advanced knowledge, or it's not something that I do very often. Would you be interested in it? And I hook them up to it. And then when I go out in the field to do something, I need professionals, I hire them to work with me. But yeah, I think that that's a fear that a lot of people have, is that all this stuff replaces. And I don't think it replaces it any more than digital photographs. replace the need to take care of older records by any means.
I'm going to have to chime in here because we're right at time, and I do want to have some wrap up or a wrap up comment before I let you all go. So first, thank you all for coming and having a conversation with us. I had a lot of fun. Hopefully you learned some stuff and got some good information from everybody. And I also want to encourage all of you to join the preservation section. If you're here from SNAP, we're happy to have you. We also have a good listserv. So if you have any questions that we talked about today, or if you have any questions about preservation and you don't know, just drop it in the listserv, and I bet you that you'll get a lot of good advice on there as well. So please join us. We're happy to have you. And I think that's it, unless there's anything else anyone would like to say. But with that, thanks again for coming today, and we hope to have another one of these at some point in the future. All right.